Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. My name is Chris Armstrong, and tonight we're going to be talking about making work visible. But first, with me tonight, I have got David Maynard,
Hello.
Simon Pryor,
Hello.
and first time Rachel Kibler.
Howdy.
Did I say your surname correctly?
You did.
Oh, thank goodness. That's a good relief. Whew. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Right, before we dive into the banter, we have got a sponsor message from our sponsors, nFocus. nFocus are a UK-based software testing company. They've been supporting businesses for 24 years by providing services that include burst resource, accelerated test automation, performance testing, and fully managed testing services. In 2021, they launched a Test Automation Academy to create amazing testers, and they've now created jobs for 48 people in our industry in just under 3 years, which is a pretty impressive hit rate. I can't wait to hear this. That I did recently see there was a new cohort, so that's really exciting to see where those folks go. Good job, nFocus. If you want to learn more, go to nfocus.co.uk or email info@nfocus.co.uk, and as ever, information will be in the show notes. Now, banter, David Maynard, what have you got?
Yeah, so we're obviously talking about visibility, and I immediately went for some reason to fashion because I wear loud, or visible clothing to go cycling. However, what I want to know is what fashion faux pas from your past are you going to admit tonight and be, you're a bit ashamed of standing out from the crowd or fitting in with the crowd, but realizing that actually it's not necessarily what the look you were looking for.
I don't know if I've ever had a fashion faux pas before. I've certainly had moments when I felt uncomfortable, but that was normally just because I thought I was going to stick out like a sore thumb when probably I wasn't, and I was a bit uncomfortable in my own skin. But I do recall the first time I worked for a company that had dress down Fridays. My first Friday, I didn't actually know what they meant by dress down Friday. So I dressed down in my normal street clothes, but I had brought with me smarter clothes and hung it up in my car just in case. And I sat in the car park and watched 4 or 5 people walk into the office first, just to make sure that I didn't rock up in something that was totally inappropriate and I could just whip a shirt on and everything. As it turned out, it was fine. But that was probably the closest moment I would have had to that. It's not quite a faux pas, but it would have been a cringy kind of moment for me.
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily a faux pas as such, but I used to have, and I blame my neurodivergence on this one, but I used to have this real obsession with really bright, garish shirts. And at university, I got quite a reputation for my bright shirts, horrific shirts now when I look back at them. And actually, to a point that play a prank on me, my friends broke into my halls of residence room, broke into my wardrobe, took all my shirts, and then they were all sat at dinner in the halls of residence in their zip-up jackets. And I was like, "Why have you got your jackets on?" And they sort of made some joke about it's sweating buckets or something in here. And then they all took their zip jackets off and they all had all my shirts on, which it's funny at the time. It did make me realize, geez, they are bright, they are horrific. And thankfully, I don't have that kind of obsession with the really bright sort of. It was those shirts with like big dragons on the back for no particular reason, or bright flames, or just wouldn't wear them now.
I love that. Casual Fridays. At my very first job, there were casual Fridays, and I wore a hoodie, and that was a faux pas. It was very strict. Like casual Fridays meant business casual, not come dressed in street clothes. But I'd say that my biggest mistake was wearing dresses without pockets for so many years. Dresses with pockets are an absolute must. And now all of my outfits have pockets so that I can carry interesting rocks or, my wallet and phone instead of a purse. That's my biggest fashion thing.
Very good. Yeah, so for me, I'm a child of the 80s, and there were lots of fashion faux pas in those days. So I do remember buying a white and pale blue sort of lightweight jacket. It was cotton material, so it wouldn't have gone up, wasn't polyester or anything, but it was not a good look. And I think I only ever wore it once and realized that actually it was a waste of money. And it was quite baggy as well, it's those baggy things. Another thing that I used to do, I have a background in teaching, and to be a bit different as a teacher, I wore character ties, and that's something that I don't wear anymore.
Do you still wear a tie
was
to
your-
work every day?
No, I don't. I've finished. That's an area of my life. I did use. I mean, for many years.
Windsor knot and everything.
Yeah, Windsor knot and everything. But no ties anymore. I've gone.
Did you have a favorite character tie, David?
Oh, well, most of them were Disney. So I had a Mickey Mouse tie. I had a. Now it sounds horrific, but actually it was quite tasteful. It was a Little Mermaid one, but it wasn't Little Mermaid, her head or whatever. It looked like it was just through. It was green. It was sort of swirling green, so it wasn't obvious there was Little Mermaid. But yeah, that was one of my favorite ones. So, or most memorable, because that's what I remember. So, Rachel, do you want to lead us on making work visible?
Sure. So recently, over the last 6 months, I joined a project where we were transforming our line of business from one tech stack to an entirely new tech stack with different integrations and everything. It was a massive project, engaged 7+ teams across the company and engaged outside contractors. It was huge. We finally launched a month ago, and one of the things that I had to do during that time was organize all the testing, but make the testing visible and make all the work that the teams were doing visible. I had to be able to present a coherent story and a compelling story to the business so that they could make an informed decision of when to launch and how well the launch could possibly go. So that was really engaging for me, of trying to figure out how to do all of that. And I tried a bunch of different ways and messed up a bunch of different ways and finally settled on one that worked. But it's a topic that is now very near and dear to me because I was heads down in it for, oh goodness, 6 months. So I thought that would be an interesting topic for today.
There's a lot to unpack, isn't there, with making work visible?
Totally. I always think that I think testing is more difficult to show or make it visible because developers develop stuff, and so therefore you can see the content of what they're actually doing, whereas often the work that testers do, even writing the framework or whatever, it's just there to sort of semi-hidden because you need to be able to use it in order to verify or validate the work that the very visible work that the developers has done. So, and then obviously once you've done the test or written the framework and then run the tests, you then need to validate or show that work has been completed as well, and try and link it to things. Unless it's validation and stuff, in which case you might not have a requirement, in which case you then need to sell it to the customer or the client as to why it's valid. In fact, that's what I'm going through at the moment, is that with the product we're working on, is that we have done a lot of testing looking at the requirements, but in the real world, people might use it in a very different way. So we're trying to make sure that our work in a similar way is visible to the client, to make sure that when it is launched in the real world and people might not use it in the way prescribed in the requirements, they're not caught out by things. But selling that to the client is a bit tricky at times, because again, that visibility, what are we actually getting for what the effort that we're putting into this?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an experience I've had as well. I think one of the biggest challenges is especially when there's a cost associated with the work the testing is going to cost the project. you get a lot of pushback of, well, why are we spending this amount on testing? Well, I don't see where the value is. And it's very difficult to actually then showcase, well, this is the value you're getting. You're getting a product that we're confident in, but that's not tangible. So it's how do you then articulate that and demonstrate that, make it visible to the stakeholders that what you're doing is adding value. Automation can be sometimes seen as, oh, they're adding an automation, so that's going to make it faster to release. But still, it's not the end product. It's not, you're not delivering the sexy software. It's the, how do we make it work behind the scenes? It's the risk logs, it's the test reports, it's the low level detail of, we've executed X amount of tests and this is what we've discovered. That isn't stuff that necessarily sells when it comes to the visibility.
You highlight a really interesting point about cost, and I think test is often seen as a cost, and that's a really difficult thing to actually get round in terms of companies. That actually the visibility is the fact that we're adding value. What value are we adding in terms of the reasons why we're doing it? Because if you just look at the cost, going back to the sort of the cost of development, often you can see what's happening. There is a cost. Each particular aspect of it is given given a cost value. Story points even can be interpreted into a type of cost. But actually, the cost of putting quality, or making sure the product is of higher quality, is far more nuanced. Because as we've discussed before, the idea of quality is one person's understanding at a particular time, and so making sure that everyone's on board with the quality aspect that you're doing or getting to, again, is that sort of, is part of that aspect of visibility as well. Can I ask you, Rachel, what sort of things did you do to make what you were doing more visible?
Yeah, so I created a centralized Jira board, yay Jira boards, where everyone from all the teams would throw their launch blocker work on the board, by tagging it using a label. Very simple, but using this label would show up on my board. So that was one way. And so all bugs were filed against it and then divided out to teams or handed out to teams who needed them. And then from that Jira board, I was able to create a dashboard with very pretty graphics about whose teams still had work to do, and how many were bugs and how many were stories, things like that. But then I also created a separate testing dashboard just in an Excel file with completely objective and made up numbers, as you do, of how every tester felt the coverage was on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 9, because we can never be at a 10, right? And also how people felt the quality was from 1 to 9. And then I'd color code those, with green being, yes, let's go. This is all solid. We don't need to do anything else with it. I used blue for completely untested, and then orange was somewhere in the middle, needs work or is buggy or not feature complete, things like that. So I had those 3 ways to show visibility, and then I would, oh man, this was a really manual process. I take screenshots of things because I couldn't rely on people to actually go to the links that I sent. So I would take screenshots and then post them in our launch coordination channel with the story that I wanted people to know, of like, here's the testing that we've been doing, this is how it went, and then here's the status of everything. And then I would try to stay away from giving my own opinion of like, I think we can launch next week, because that wasn't my role. It was just saying, I'm not feeling great about this, or this is going smoothly, but I still have concerns about this. So that's what I did several times a week to create more visibility.
Sounds really good. I'm really interested about your color coding and stuff. So who had input into that? Was that the developers and the testers, or just the testers?
It was just the testers. It was meant to be owned just by people who were doing the actual testing on features. So it was broken down by product, so like website, call center, fulfillment, prescriptions, things like that. And then within that, it would have things like this specific aspect or performance, things like that.
Really good. Thank you.
And how did the stakeholders react to it? Were the stakeholders on board with it?
They loved it. It seemed like they loved it. They were encouraging, and I asked the CEO of the company if he actually cared about what I wrote, and he's like, I read it every time and love it. So, yeah, it worked out well.
No, that's really good. It reminds me because I did something maybe not quite to the scale that you had success with, but did something where we tried to articulate the risk of the system through different system components and just the color coding of red, green, based on the testing, and that having that visibility of something that people can take one look at it and they can see straight away where there's risks in the system that haven't been mitigated through testing. They were able to get a picture of, okay, how do we get system A to be up to the level of confidence that you've got with system B and C? And it starts that conversation of, well, if you give us another week of time to do testing, we'll get that piece covered off as well. And it just was able to be a conversation starter. So I think it's great that kind of success can happen with the project you've put together.
So it started, I was very reliant on the Excel spreadsheet and the color coding at the beginning, because that was how I showed features and when we were feature complete and the testing levels there. And then it became very heavily reliant on Jira and the dashboard that I created from Jira at the end of these are the number of bugs that we have to fix before we can go live. So it was good. Everything was good at different times, and it was just what was needed for the time.
I really like the way you talked about how it was an opportunity for you to be able to present the right levels of data and information so that decisions could be made. And there's so much value in that level of visibility and transparency, not just because good data enables us to make good choices, but also I think we talked in previous episodes about this whole thing about testers striving to be trusted partners, trusted advisors in the organization. And when you can back things up, show transparency, time is spent here, risks are here, we're putting effort into here, here are the reasons for us to do those things, so that you've got much more understanding of what we're doing. They get more visibility on why we spend this much time on these things, why we spend these resources here, why on paper a bunch of numbers over here doesn't necessarily tell you the story that you might otherwise think, because we're all anchored by numbers, and people will search for the shiny happy numbers that make them look good, perhaps, or to enable them to get budget and stuff. And sometimes breaking all of those things down just with some raw data and then saying, this is the story that we're telling, this is why we're doing this, these are the risk areas, so you can then make your informed choices. That's wonderful, but it takes a lot of work to compile all of that. I mean, how do you even start to come up with a design of these sorts of things, putting it together? How do you make that work visible to people so that you're afforded the time to be able to do that? Because it's a painstaking long thing before you start to get those results, right?
Yeah, definitely. My problem was that everything was in chaos up until that point. And so it had to be visible in some way. And that was personally, I was being pestered 3, 4 times a day by up to 10 different people, it felt like, of how are things going? What are the blockers? And so it was a way I took it didn't take all that much time to get the very simple Excel spreadsheet set up. And that eased some of it. And then when the questions started ramping up again, I was like, okay, give me a couple hours to do this and I'll give you some more visibility. And so that stopped the bulk of the pestering so that I could actually get the testing done, the work done. Yeah. I love that we need or I think it's important that we have visibility just to justify our jobs, like David and Simon were talking about before, and Chris going into a new job, uh, kind of unknown. Yeah, how have your experiences been with that?
So for me, for visibility, sometimes test gets hidden. You've reminded me about a Jira board when you talked about it, in that when we were creating tickets for one particular project, they were hiding test within the same ticket as the development, rather than, and even not, we were trying to create a subtask even to go, look, separate out the development from the test. And so therefore they were looking at the story points or the duration on the ticket when the developer had it, and they thought, okay, we've got 3 days to do the work in it, so I'll fill the 3 days, but not looking at the finer print of going, actually this needs to be development and test, so therefore you need 2 days developing and 1 day of test. So what happened was the ticket was finished in terms of development, and there was no extra time on it, which sort of broke down the whole visibility in that respect, because there was no visibility of test because test was enveloped in the development time. And so eventually they did create subtasks, but it's so frustrating that they didn't think of it in the first place in order to enable the best chance of success. And that's why I was interested about your idea about the writing in the quality, or people's interpretation of quality in that thing. I think it's really valuable, that particular aspect of it, because that you are informing people on the confidence of the people doing the testing as to how good or what high quality looks like in their eyes, as to how, and the confidence of accepting it in terms of what they're willing to release.
I think one of the biggest challenges with visibility, certainly in my area, is being an enterprise. Every team does things differently, and every project manager, every product manager, every team setup and stakeholders expect different things because of what they're used to. So when we come in and try and consolidate the way we do things across all of the QE functions, it's the visibility is key, because they need to see why we're doing things differently to what we were before. And it's just trying to get those key pieces in place that we can then talk about, articulate why we're doing it, showcase the value that they provide, and get them on board. And it seems to be that the key with the visibility piece is bringing the stakeholders on the journey, showing them why they need to care about stuff, and giving them something that can give them that information very quickly. If you're sending them a 50-page report to tell them that you've run all these tests and this is what you found, they're not going to read it. They're just going to come back to you and go, so you tell me what I need to know. Whereas if you can make it, bam, on a page, very visible, dashboards, or like you say, a Jira board, or whatever it is that shows the very simple information in the key areas that they need to go, right, I need to make a decision based on this, then you've done your job. You've provided that visibility that makes it confident. And what I'm finding is it's less about doing all the exciting testing behind the scenes where no one can see it. It's making and shouting about what you're doing. And if you're doing an exploratory testing session that's found some real corkers of defects, find a way to articulate that and show that to the stakeholders so they can care about it as well. I think sometimes we get so in our own heads about testing that we have to do all this cool stuff to make testing worthwhile. But then actually what we're presenting to the stakeholders is no different to what we presented before. So they see no value in doing the extra stuff. So it's how do we change the narrative, and while doing the fun stuff ourselves, make sure that people can see why we're doing the fun stuff and what extra value it's adding.
I think also the way that you give the information is really key. I remember one of the project managers that I worked with said, "I don't want any pie charts, because you could hide a lot of information in pie charts." To be fair, you can hide a lot of information in whatever way that you put the information, but picking up on Simon and your point, Rachel, is creating dashboards. We work in a business that we need to create dashboards as part of it, and each dashboard is different because the information that the client or the project want is very different every time. So one size doesn't fit all, but also going to Simon's point is that you need to be able to visually and digest it quickly and easily, so it's obvious when things are going wrong or things aren't, or things are going well as well, you know, so therefore you can quickly pivot and change your outlook based on those results, and it, you know, especially with CI and CD, you know, it you need to have that quick turnaround and that confidence that actually the information you're getting is real time or close to real time, so that you can make a decision based on that information at that given time.
It's interesting because, like Rachel, you mentioned, I've come into a new company and I need to uncover context very quickly, in order to not only feel that I'm being effective, but to also just understand what the hell is going on. And you know, there's so much that we as testers are taught to do, funneling questions, lots of whys, sort of picking out bits and bobs and using social engineering to sort of find ways through. But as you pick your way through new projects, new teams, new people, you start to hear a different story to that which you are presented with. And that's not just the case of you've interviewed with a company and when you turn up on day one, it's different to what you expected. It's also, we're agile, and then you go and look and see all the way they work and you go, no, you're not. And you might say, oh, well, you know, we're really good at automation. And you have a look and go, you've just automated a bunch of manual test cases. All right. You know, and that what sort of uncover is there's often a lot of questions you'll ask and go, well, why are we doing it like this? What was the decision that was made? What do we feel like we want to do to improve things? And a lot of the time I'm sort of finding myself asking questions that I've asked for years, and I'm receiving answers from colleagues that I've received for years, even though context is different, even though different people, different tech stacks, a lot of these things happen, and I think there's a lot of traps that we as testers historically have got stuck in, making work visible being numbers of test cases or time taken to execute, number of bugs, and those sorts of areas, and that kind of the line stops there. And you know, we spend a lot of time on a lot of things, and not all of those things can necessarily be represented as a product backlog item. And I wonder sometimes that there is this trap that some people thrive in and other people don't, which is this grey area between that which is explicitly visible and that which is not, and where people can get away with doing things that they shouldn't. And sometimes that which you shouldn't do, the glue work and things, can provide a lot of value, but nobody sees it, and you can end up getting punished, marked down, low performance reviews, whatever. People just don't see their value until you're not there. But sometimes people can spend time doing things that they shouldn't be. You know, I really want to spend a lot of time automating using this whole new fancy tool, even though that isn't the decision. Like, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Extra complexity for the sake of it because I wanted to learn that thing doesn't necessarily provide that level of value. And what I'm coming in and doing is seeing there's people doing similar things in different places, but they don't know about it because we're not communicating. And maybe that communication doesn't have to be one to one. Oh, don't get me started on IM tools at work and people going, let's use a channel, let's spin up a chat, let's have an email thread here, let's have a call. All that sort of stuff's broken in many organizations. But there's also this whole sort of world where sometimes people have got into this position in an organization where it's better just to do what I think is right without asking for help because maybe it's not psychologically safe, where maybe I'll just get told no. Maybe I know there's a really long process to get something approved. We can't do X, Y, Z, so let's just take a free version of a tool that we're not really allowed to use just because we want to get ahead because we've got pressure to do stuff. And I found already speaking to people that they they're quite willing to be candid with you as long as they know that they're not going to be named when you're talking about things that you uncover. It's mad. But you just, I don't know, I think it's so hard because I think we've grown up in a world where there's so much stuff that is taboo. Maybe we've, in school you can't talk about this. In the office, so we don't talk about that, remove politics from the workplace, or we can't talk about money because of whatever reason. There's all kinds of other stuff. And it's like, don't tell so and so that you're doing those sorts of things. Make sure you look busy. Get a little thing for your mouse that can move about so people can obviously understand that you're only working if your mouse is moving on a computer. Like it's crazy, and I don't think there's a single solution for any of this stuff. But if we don't communicate what we're doing, people are and micromanagers live in the world. I don't know how you deal with them. It's a weird sort of thing that my monologue is coming to an end, but I don't know how we resolve these things apart from trying to understand a culture and try to affect change not by ourselves.
I think you highlight a couple of things. You mentioned psychological safety. I'm very pro psychological safety, but it goes two ways. If you're new to a company, they don't know how psychologically safe it is talking to you as a new person. They don't know how much you'll pass on to other people. And I can completely get people's reticence in making sure that it goes no further, because they're just reassuring you that they're giving you something in confidence. Another thing I would also say is when we go into a new company, I like to ask the same question to lots of people to see whether I get the same answer, because that's another interesting thing. And, if you start getting different answers from different people, then there's something wrong in the communication. There's something wrong in the visibility, because one person's understanding of what's happening is very different to someone else's understanding of what's happening. And so, yeah, that's definitely not a red flag, but it's definitely something to look at in terms of visibility in that respect.
But you get the same answer every time. That can be suspicious as well. I'm reminded of a Brooklyn
Yeah,
Nine-Nine episode where they turn up somewhere and everybody gives an identical answer, and it's
Yes.
very suspicious.
There's obviously been drilled into them from from up above.
There is no war in Bossing Say. No, from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Ah, no, that one, yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Zasla should apologize.
Yeah, I think the way that companies present themselves in interviews, and then when you get in there and find out that, oh, everything is actually very different from how the people who were doing the interviewing thought it was. I've had that experience before, and
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I've certainly always tried to be as transparent as I can be when interviewing people, as to far as it's not all a bed of roses. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. There is some stuff that's quite challenging, and then I've been told, no, you can't tell them that. You might put them off. And I was like, I'd rather them be aware of it before they start than they come in thinking everything's hunky dory and they're going to be in this highly agile world where everyone's collaborative, to walk into a building and testers are sat one end of the room, developers are sat the other, the PM's in the middle dictating how they're going to work together. And it's, I'd rather them be open to that to start with, and at least work with them. So I think, and that transparency is definitely a key part of the visibility as well. Is you have to start somewhere, and understanding where your baseline is, and being aware of what you're walking into is key. But yeah, it never gets any easier when you're trying to push yourself and make yourself visible in an environment that you're new to.
The other thing I would say in sort of interview situation is having visibility of the people that you're working with. Sometimes you are stuck in a room with your potentially your new boss and possibly their boss or whatever, and not actually meeting the developers or whatever. And that's always so how can we make a sensible decision based on how we see the company if we don't see the ethos of or the working environment or how people work together? that's a very difficult one in terms of visibility as well, is being able to see what the company is like. And I think a tour or whatever, or at least meeting someone in the team is vitally important.
It's actually been a trend I've noticed in recent times where people in interviews say, I'm going to try and put you off this role now by telling you a bit more candidly about the challenges that we are facing, which is something I do appreciate, as long as they're actually being honest about those sorts of things. I do think transparency is super important. Obviously, there's a level of safety that you need to have with your transparency, but it's a core part of sort of Scrum, isn't it? The three pillars of empiricism is the inspect, adapt, transparency. And I think if we can get into a practice of speaking our minds professionally and sharing what we're doing more openly with people, people will respond typically to that sort of approach, like for like. There's always going to be bad actors. There's always going to be toxic workplaces. But I do think that we have to live with ourselves 24/7. And we don't want to end up having to be false versions of ourselves representing false reports and doing things that we're not comfortable, not happy with. And so I think there's an integrity piece, and I know we can be privileged to be in a place to be able to say no and to better represent ourselves on those things. But, I think the world is a much better place when we know what the hell's going on, even if it's a nasty shock at the beginning. I think short-term pain for long-term gain is always better. And what was it they say? The truth will set you free. And if you get in the practice of just telling the truth, it's liberating for your mind, because you're not having to think, what does this person know? What does that person not know? What version of myself do I have to be over here? What kind of report have I got to do here? Sure, we tailor to different audiences, to the reports, to your comment before about the different reports that people aren't going to read, Simon. But if it's all sourced from the same good data at the beginning, you can flex and change to that audience. You're not telling a wildly different story to different people. I think that's a good place to be. So, hooray for visibility.
Well, thank you everyone for your contributions tonight. I think it's been a useful discussion. I've certainly learned a couple of things around visibility. So thank you again for your contributions. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us for the first time. Hopefully it's not been too daunting for you, but really appreciated your company.
I've loved being here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you to Enfocus for continuing to sponsor the podcast. Thank you all for listening. For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.